The crack of thunder broke through the silence of the night as Marigold Ayers pressed her back against the cabin wall, clutching her infant daughter to her chest. The storm outside mirrored the tempest in her heart, grief, exhaustion, and fear swirling like the dust devils that plagued the Montana Territory. The year was 1876, and life on the frontier had proven far crueler than she had ever imagined. "Hush now, Emma," she whispered, her voice cracking as she gently bounced the fussing baby. The small, one-room cabin offered little comfort, just a bed with a threadbare quilt, a rickety table with a single chair, and a potbelly stove that struggled to keep the spring chill at bay. The pounding on her door startled her so badly she nearly screamed. Past midnight visitors in this remote stretch of land rarely brought good news. "Who's there?" she called, her free hand instinctively reaching for the rifle prop beside the door, the one her husband had taught her to use before typhoid had taken him just 3 weeks after Emma's birth. "Madam? You got smoke coming from your chimney, but your wood pile's nearly gone. Thought you might need help." The voice was deep, tinged with a drawl that suggested Texas origins. Marigold hesitated, bouncing Emma, who had begun to wail in earnest. "I've got a loaded rifle pointed at this door, mister." A low chuckle came from the other side. "I'd expect nothing less from a lady living alone. Name's Tucker Everett. I'm working cattle for the Double B Ranch about 5 miles east. Was riding fence when the storm hit and saw your light." She cracked the door open just enough to see the figure standing on her porch, tall, broad-shouldered, with a rain-slicked hat pulled low over his eyes. The lightning illuminated him briefly, revealing a face weathered by sun and wind, but kind eyes that held no threat. "I'm fine, thank you," she said, even as Emma's cries grew louder. The man Tucker glanced at the baby and then back at Marigold's face, taking in the dark circles under her eyes, the way her dress hung loose on her frame. "With all due respect, madam, you don't look fine." Another crack of thunder made Marigold jump, and Emma's wails intensified. She felt tears welling up in her eyes, the cumulative exhaustion of weeks without proper sleep threatening to overwhelm her. "I haven't slept in weeks," she said, holding her baby, her voice breaking on the confession. Tucker nodded once, decision made. "Let me help you, madam. Just tonight. I'll get your fire going properly and tend to whatever needs doing while you rest." Something in his steady gaze made her step back, allowing him entry. Perhaps it was desperation, or perhaps it was simply that she recognized a decent man when she saw one. He removed his hat upon entering, revealing thick brown hair in need of a trim. "Why don't you sit, madam? That little one sounds mighty unhappy." "Emma," Marigold said, sinking into the chair. "Her name is Emma." Tucker nodded as he moved efficiently around the small space, building up the fire and removing his rain-soaked coat. "And you, madam?" "Marigold Ayers. My husband, James," her voice caught. "He passed 6 weeks ago." Tucker paused in his work, genuine sympathy crossing his features. "I'm mighty sorry to hear that, Mrs. Ayers." Emma continued to cry, her tiny face red with the effort. Marigold bounced her gently, but her own exhaustion made her movements jerky and uncoordinated. "May I?" Tucker asked, approaching with his hands extended. Marigold hesitated. This man was a stranger, after all, but there was something in his eyes, something gentle and reassuring that made her relent. Tucker took the baby with practiced ease, his large hands cradling her tiny form securely. "Hello there, Miss Emma," he murmured, his voice dropping to a soft rumble. He began to rock gently from side to side. To Marigold's astonishment, Emma's cries began to soften. "You've had experience with babies?" she asked. Tucker's lips quirked in a half-smile. "For younger siblings, madam. I was old enough to help with all of them." He continued the gentle, swaying motion, adding a soft humming that seemed to further soothe Emma. The baby's cries gradually subsided into whimpers, then into the occasional hiccup as her eyes grew heavy. "She's probably hungry," Marigold said, reaching for her daughter. "When did you last eat, Mrs. Ayers?" Tucker asked, not immediately returning the baby. The question caught her off guard. I'm not sure. Yesterday morning, perhaps." His expression grew concerned. "A nursing mother needs her strength. Let me fix you something while you feed her." Before she could protest, Tucker had located her meager supplies and was preparing a simple meal of cornmeal mush with the last of her dried apple slices mixed in. The domestic ease with which he moved around her kitchen might have been comical in another setting. This tall cowboy with his spurs still attached to his boots, handling a cast iron pan with the confidence of a seasoned cook. After Marigold had fed Emma and eaten the simple meal Tucker prepared, the exhaustion hit her like a physical force. "Sleep, Mrs. Ayers," Tucker said gently, taking Emma from her arms once more. "I'll watch over you both tonight." In any other circumstance, she would have refused. But as the storm continued to rage outside and her eyelids grew impossibly heavy, Marigold surrendered to her body's demands. "The rocker," she mumbled, gesturing to the wooden rocking chair beside the stove. "Emma likes the motion." Tucker nodded, already settling into the chair with the baby cradled against his broad chest. "We'll be just fine, madam. Rest now." The last thing Marigold saw before sleep claimed her was the cowboy rocking her baby, his deep voice softly singing a lullaby she didn't recognize. When Marigold opened her eyes, sunlight was streaming through the cabin's single window. For a moment, she was disoriented. She hadn't slept past sunrise in weeks. Then the memories of the night before came rushing back, and she sat up with a gasp. Tucker Everett was still there, dozing in the rocking chair with Emma securely nestled in one arm, while his other hand remained protectively around her tiny form. The fire in the stove had been maintained throughout the night, and Marigold noticed with surprise that her small cabin had been tidied, the dishes washed, the floor swept. As if sensing her gaze, Tucker's eyes opened. He straightened, careful not to disturb the sleeping infant. "Morning, Mrs. Ayers," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Hope you don't mind the liberties I took with straightening up a bit." "You've been up all night?" she asked, pushing her tangled hair back from her face. "Emma and I came to an understanding," he said with a slight smile. "She fussed a bit around 3, but seemed content enough after I changed her and walked her around some." Marigold felt a strange mixture of gratitude and embarrassment. "Mr. Everett, I can't thank you enough, but—" "Tucker, please," he interrupted gently. "And there's no need for thanks. Anyone would have done the same. But they wouldn't have, and they both knew it." The frontier bred a certain hardiness, but also a wariness of strangers and their troubles. Emma began to stir, making the small mewling sounds that preceded full-fledged hunger cries. Tucker stood carefully and brought her to Marigold. "I'll step outside while you tend to her," he said, grabbing his hat. "Then, with your permission, I'd like to cut some wood for you before I head back to the ranch." Marigold wanted to refuse, to insist she could manage on her own as she had been trying to do since James's death. But the night of uninterrupted sleep had cleared her mind enough to recognize the foolishness of pride in her situation. "That would be very kind, thank you," she said. While she fed Emma, Marigold listened to the rhythmic sound of an axe splitting wood. It was a sound that had once been commonplace, James rising before dawn to ensure she had enough fuel for the day's cooking and heating. The familiar noise brought tears to her eyes that she quickly blinked away. When Tucker returned, his shirt damp with honest sweat despite the cool morning, Marigold had composed herself and prepared coffee from her dwindling supplies. "Your woodpile should last a few days now," he said, accepting the cup gratefully. "But if you don't mind my saying, Mrs. Ayers, this is no place for a woman and baby alone." "I have nowhere else to go," she said simply. "James and I came west from Pennsylvania 2 years ago. Our families didn't approve of the match as people thought I was too common. Mine thought he was too reckless." She smiled faintly at the memory. They were right, of course. James was always chasing the next adventure. This homestead was to be our fresh start. Tucker nodded thoughtfully. "The Double B is looking for a cook," he said after a moment. "The owner, Mrs. Blackburn, is a widow herself. Runs the place with an iron hand, but a fair one. She's got a small house near the main ranch that you and Emma could use." Marigold stiffened. "I don't need charity, Mr. Everett." "Tucker," he corrected again. "And it's not charity. Mrs. Blackburn pays well for good work. The Cowboys are about ready to mutiny over cookies biscuits like chewing on saddle leather." He grinned. "Even that simple meal you made yesterday would be a vast improvement." "I couldn't possibly at least consider it?" Tucker asked, his expression serious now. "Winter will be here before you know it, and it's a hard season to face alone." Marigold looked down at Emma, now contentedly asleep after her feeding. The prospect of another Montana winter in this isolated cabin with only her meager supplies and uncertain skills, was terrifying. And yet, "I'll think about it," she conceded. Tucker nodded, seeming to understand the struggle playing out within her. "I'll stop by in a few days, see how you're faring." He placed his hat back on his head and moved toward the door. "Rest today, Mrs. Ayers. You've earned it." With that, he was gone, the sound of hoofbeats fading as he rode back toward his responsibilities at the Double B. True to his word, Tucker returned 3 days later, this time in mid-afternoon with his horse laden with supplies: flour, coffee, sugar, and even some fresh vegetables from the ranch's kitchen garden. "Mr. Everett," Marigold protested, "I can't accept all this." "Consider it an advance on your wages," he said with an easy smile. "Mrs. Blackburn is mighty interested in meeting you. Says a woman who can manage a homestead and a newborn alone has the kind of grit she respects." The next few days established a pattern. Tucker would ride out to check on them, always bringing some small gift: a piece of fresh game he'd hunted, a jar of preserves from the ranch cook's stores, once even a soft woolen blanket for Emma that he claimed Mrs. Blackburn had sent. Each time, he would spend an hour or two helping with whatever needed doing: mending the porch step, fixing a leak in the roof, or simply holding Emma while Marigold rested or cooked them a simple meal. It was during his 5th visit, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset while Emma dozed in a makeshift cradle, that Marigold finally asked the question that had been bothering her. "Why are you doing all this, Tucker? Surely you have better things to do than look after a widow and her baby." He was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the sun was painting the Montana sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "My sister," he finally said, his voice soft. "She lost her husband 3 years back. Quantrill's raiders caught him on his way to town. She had a newborn son and no one to help her. By the time word reached me and I could get to her." He took a deep breath. "The baby had taken fever, and my sister wasn't far behind. I was too late for both of them." "Oh, Tucker," Marigold whispered, instinctively reaching out to touch his arm. He covered her hand with his own. "When I found you that night, looking about as exhausted and desperate as anyone I'd ever seen, it felt like a second chance somehow. A chance to do what I couldn't do for Sarah." The honesty of his confession touched something deep within Marigold, a recognition of shared pain, but also of remarkable resilience. "I've decided to accept Mrs. Blackburn's offer," she said. "Emma and I can't stay here alone." Relief flooded Tucker's features. "That's good news, Marigold. Real good news." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep, gentle voice sent an unexpected warmth through her. The following week saw Marigold and Emma relocated to the small but sturdy house near the main buildings of the Double B Ranch. Mrs. Blackburn Harriet to her friends was indeed formidable, but had welcomed Marigold with gruff kindness that belied her reputation. "Good to have another woman around who understands what it takes to survive out here," the older woman had said, eyeing Marigold appraisingly. "These cowboys might know cattle and horses, but most of them can barely take care of themselves, let alone appreciate what it means to build a real home in this wilderness." Marigold's duties as cook kept her busy from before dawn until after the evening meal was cleared away, but the work was satisfying. The cowboys, about 15 men of varying ages, were unfailingly polite and genuinely appreciative of her cooking, which, while simple, was a vast improvement over their previous fare. Tucker kept his distance at first, seemingly conscious of how it might look for him to show particular attention to the new widow. But Marigold often caught him watching her from across the dining hall, his eyes warm with an emotion she wasn't ready to name. Emma thrived in the new environment. The ranch hands doted on her, bringing her little carved wooden toys and competing for her smiles. Mrs. Blackburn, for all her tough exterior, could often be found cradling the baby when Marigold was especially busy in the kitchen. It was early June when trouble came to the Double B in the form of 3 rough-looking men who rode in during the noon meal. Marigold was in the kitchen when she heard the commotion, raised voices, then the unmistakable sound of chairs scraping back as men stood quickly. She peered through the kitchen door to see Tucker and 2 other cowboys facing off against the strangers. Emma was napping in a basket near the stove, and Marigold's first instinct was to go to her, to protect her from whatever danger had arrived. "You've got no business here, Rudder," Tucker was saying, his voice colder than Marigold had ever heard it. Mrs. Blackburn made it clear last time. The man called Rudder tall, with a scar running from his right eye to his jaw, sneered. The old lady's running out of time. Water rights to that creek aren't worth dying over. That's not for you to decide, Tucker replied evenly. Now I suggest you boys get back on your horses and ride out the same way you came in. Rudder's hand twitched toward his gun, but he seemed to think better of it as he took in the number of ranch hands now standing, ready for trouble. This isn't over, Everett. Not by a long shot. After the men had departed, Marigold emerged from the kitchen, Emma now awake and cradled in her arms. What was that about? She asked Tucker, who was still staring after the retreating riders. Water dispute, he said shortly. Rudder's outfit, the Lazy S, has been trying to claim exclusive rights to Cottonwood Creek for years. It's the only year-round water source for miles, and it happens to run right through Double B land. Are they dangerous? Marigold asked, instinctively holding Emma closer. Tucker's expression softened as he looked at them. Rudder's all talk mostly. Been threatening for years, but never does much beyond stealing a few head of cattle now and then. But something in his eyes told Marigold he wasn't entirely convinced of his own assessment. That night, after everyone had retired to their quarters, Marigold was startled by a soft knock at her door. She opened it to find Tucker standing there, looking uncharacteristically hesitant. I'm sorry to disturb you, he said. I just wanted to make sure you and Emma were settling in all right. After today's excitement. We're fine, she assured him, stepping back to allow him entry. Emma's already asleep. Tucker moved to the small cradle where the baby lay, his expression softening as he gazed down at her. She's growing so fast, he murmured. Sometimes I look at her and see James, Marigold said softly, especially around the eyes. Tucker nodded, respecting the memory of her husband. He must have been a good man, to have won your heart. He was, Marigold confirmed. Reckless sometimes, but kind. Full of dreams. She smiled faintly. When we came west, he had such grand plans: a prosperous farm, a fine house, children running in the yard. Those are good dreams, Tucker said. What about you? Marigold asked, suddenly curious. What dreams bring a Texas man all the way to Montana territory? Tucker was silent for a moment, considering. After the war, Texas didn't feel like home anymore. Too many ghosts, I suppose. I came north looking for open country and honest work. He shrugged. Found both at the Double B. No thoughts of your own ranch someday? A family? Something flickered in his eyes. I've had those thoughts. Just been waiting for the right time. The right person. The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken possibilities. Marigold found herself acutely aware of his presence, the breadth of his shoulders, the gentle strength in his hands, the way his eyes seemed to see straight through to her soul. I should go, Tucker said abruptly, breaking the moment. Early start tomorrow. Marigold nodded, walking him to the door. Good night, Tucker. He paused at the threshold, looking down at her with an expression that made her heart quicken. Good night, Marigold. The weeks that followed saw a gradual shift in their relationship. Tucker found reasons to be near the kitchen when Marigold was working, offering to carry heavy items, or simply lingering to talk. In turn, she found herself looking forward to his presence, the sound of his voice, the way he always seemed to know when she needed a moment of respite from her duties. Emma, now 3 months old, had taken to Tucker completely. She would light up at the sight of him, reaching out with her tiny hands whenever he was near. She's going to break hearts someday, Tucker remarked one evening as he gently bounced the baby on his knee while Marigold prepared the next day's bread dough. Just like her father, Marigold said with a wistful smile. James could charm the birds from the trees when he set his mind to it. Tucker studied her face. You loved him very much. It wasn't a question, but Marigold answered anyway. I did, but I'm beginning to understand that love doesn't end with grief. It changes, becomes part of you in a different way. She looked up from her work, meeting his gaze directly. There's room in a heart for more than one love, I think. The implications of her words hung between them, delicate and full of promise. Before Tucker could respond, a commotion outside drew their attention. Shouting, then the unmistakable crack of gunfire split the evening air. Tucker was on his feet in an instant, handing Emma back to Marigold. Stay inside. Bar the door, he instructed, already reaching for his gun belt. Marigold clutched Emma close, fear gripping her heart as Tucker disappeared into the gathering darkness. More shots rang out, followed by the terrifying sound of men yelling and horses whinnying in panic. Through the window, she could make out shadowy figures moving around the main ranch house. A flicker of orange light bloomed suddenly fire. She realized with horror, someone had set fire to the stables. Marigold moved quickly, placing Emma in her cradle and covering her with a blanket. She retrieved the rifle she kept on a high shelf, a habit she'd maintained even after moving to the relative safety of the ranch. A crash at her back door made her whirl around, rifle raised. The door burst open to reveal Rudder, the man from the confrontation weeks earlier. "Well now," he drawled, taking in the sight of Marigold with her rifle. "Ain't you a spirited one?" "Get out," Marigold said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I will shoot you where you stand." Rudder seemed amused rather than threatened. "I believe you would at that. But I ain't here for trouble with you, madam. Just looking for Everett. Seems him and me have some unfinished business." "He's not here," Marigold said, desperately aware of Emma beginning to stir in her cradle. Rudder's eyes shifted to the sound, his expression changing as he registered the presence of the baby. Something like disgust crossed his features. "You're his woman, then? Got a kid together already?" "That's none of your concern," Marigold replied, adjusting her grip on the rifle. "Now get out before I put a hole in you." The standoff might have continued, but a shout from outside drew Rudder's attention. "Another time, then," he said, backing toward the door. "Tell Everett I'll be seeing him real soon." The moment he was gone, Marigold rushed to bar the door, then quickly checked the front entrance as well. Emma was fully awake now, crying in response to the tension and noise. Marigold scooped her up, trying to soothe her while keeping the rifle ready. The chaos outside continued for what seemed like hours, but was probably no more than 30 minutes. Eventually, the gunfire ceased, and the shouting died down to urgent conversations. Marigold remained vigilant, rocking Emma while watching the doors and windows for any sign of danger. When the knock finally came at her front door, she approached cautiously. "Marigold, it's me, Tucker. Are you and Emma all right?" She nearly collapsed with relief at the sound of his voice, quickly unbarring the door to let him in. The sight that greeted her made her gasp. Tucker's face was smudged with soot, his shirt torn and stained with what looked alarmingly like blood. "You're hurt," she said, reaching for him even as she balanced Emma in her other arm. "It's nothing," he assured her, though he winced as he moved into the small house. "Just a graze. Rudder and his boys tried to burn us out. Thought they'd steal some cattle in the confusion." "He was here," Marigold said, her voice shaking slightly at the memory. "He came looking for you." Tucker's expression darkened. "Did he harm you? Or Emma?" "No. I had the rifle ready." She guided him to a chair. "Sit. Let me tend to that wound." While Emma dozed in her cradle, now calm in the familiar surroundings, Marigold cleaned and bandaged the bullet graze on Tucker's upper arm. Her hands were gentle but efficient, skills she'd unfortunately had cause to develop during her time on the frontier. "Mrs. Blackburn?" she asked as she worked. "She's fine. Tough as old leather, that woman." Was giving orders before the last of Rudder's men had even cleared the property. Tucker managed a tired smile. "We lost 2 horses in the stable fire, but no people, thank God." When she had finished with his wound, Marigold found herself reluctant to move away from him. Tucker seemed to feel the same, his hand coming up to capture hers. "When I couldn't find you in the main house," he said, his voice rough with emotion, and then saw Rudder heading this way. "Marigold, I've never been so scared in all my life." "I was afraid too," she admitted. "Not for myself so much, but for Emma. And for you, out there facing those men." Tucker's eyes held hers, intense and unwavering. "I need you to know something. These past months, watching you rebuild your life after losing James, seeing your strength and your kindness, I've come to care for you. For both of you." He glanced toward Emma's cradle. "More than I thought possible." Marigold felt tears welling in her eyes. "Tucker, I know it might be too soon," he continued. "I know James's memory is still fresh. But I want you to know that whenever you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'll be here." The simplicity of his declaration, the honest emotion behind it, broke through the last of Marigold's hesitation. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead against his. "Life out here is too uncertain, too precious to waste," she whispered. James will always be Emma's father, and a part of my heart. But my future, our future, that's still unwritten. Tucker's hand came up to cup her cheek. Marigold Ayers, I'm asking for the chance to be part of that future. To help raise that beautiful little girl, and maybe, God willing, give her brothers and sisters someday. To build something lasting with you. In answer, Marigold closed the small distance between them, her lips meeting his in a kiss that held both tenderness and promise. The aftermath of Rutter's raid brought significant changes to the Double B. Mrs. Blackburn, deciding that enough was enough, leveraged her considerable connections to bring in the territorial marshal. Rutter and his men were arrested within the week, charged with arson, attempted rustling, and assault. With the immediate threat removed, life at the ranch settled into a more peaceful rhythm. Tucker began construction on a small house at the edge of Double B land. Mrs. Blackburn had granted him the acreage as reward for his years of loyal service. It's not much, he told Marigold as he showed her the site, but it's good land. Room for a garden, maybe some chickens. A place where Emma can grow up safe. It's perfect, she assured him, imagining the life they might build there. They were married that autumn, a simple ceremony conducted by a traveling preacher who stopped at the ranch. Mrs. Blackburn hosted the celebration, declaring that the Double B hadn't seen a proper party in far too long. Emma, now 6 months old and beginning to sit up on her own, was the center of attention, dressed in a gown that the ranch hands had pooled their money to purchase from the mercantile in town. That night, in the privacy of the small house that would be their temporary home until Tucker completed their own place, Marigold found herself overwhelmed with emotion. "Are you happy?" Tucker asked, cradling her face in his calloused hands. "More than I ever thought possible again," she answered truthfully. "When James died, I thought my life was over. I couldn't see a path forward for Emma and me. And now," she smiled, reaching up to trace the lines of his beloved face. "Now I see a future full of possibilities. A home, a family, love." Her voice softened. "You gave us that, Tucker. You gave us hope when we needed it most." Tucker shook his head slightly. "You had the strength all along, Marigold. I just helped you find it again." Emma's cry from the next room interrupted the moment. Marigold moved to go to her, but Tucker placed a gentle hand on her arm. "Let me," he said. "You've carried this burden alone long enough." She watched as he went to the baby, lifting her with practiced ease and cradling her against his broad chest. Emma's cries immediately began to soften as Tucker rocked her, his deep voice rumbling in a lullaby that Marigold now recognized as one his mother had sung to him as a child. "I haven't slept in weeks," she had told him that stormy night that seemed so long ago now, when a stranger had appeared at her door and changed the course of her life. Now, watching the cowboy rock them both till dawn broke soft and pink over the Montana hills, Marigold knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together not as strangers, but as family. 5 years later, the Everett homestead stood as testament to what determination and love could build. The small house had expanded to accommodate their growing family. Emma, now a spirited 5-year-old with her mother's dark hair and her stepfather's steady temperament, had been joined by 3-year-old twins, James and Sarah, named for those they had loved and lost. Life in Montana Territory remained challenging: harsh winters, summer droughts, the constant work of maintaining a working ranch. But each evening, as the family gathered around the table Tucker had crafted with his own hands, Marigold would look at the faces of her children and her husband and know with absolute certainty that this was where she belonged. And sometimes, on nights when the youngest wouldn't settle, she would find Tucker in the rocking chair by the fire, a small bundle cradled against his chest, his voice a low, soothing rumble in the quiet house. He would look up at her with the same tenderness she had glimpsed that first night, when a storm had brought an unexpected blessing to her door. "Go back to sleep," he would whisper. "I've got this watch." And Marigold would return to their bed, secure in the knowledge that love, like the frontier itself, required courage and faith, but the rewards were worth every sacrifice.